Stamattina mi sono alzato, oh bella ciao, bella ciao, bella ciao, ciao, ciao. Stamattina mi sono alzato e ho trovato l'invaso.
At 9:15, just as the moon was rising, he reached the Collar-Bracken meadow. At 10 he was already at the juncture of the two trees. By 12:30 he'd be at the fountain. He might reach Vendetta's camp by 1. 10 hours of walking at normal speed, but 6 hours at the most for Binda, the courier of the 1st Battalion, the fastest courier in the partisan brigade. He went hard at it, did Binda, flinging himself headlong down shortcuts, never making a mistake at crossroads that all looked alike, recognizing stones and bushes in the dark. His firm chest kept the same rhythm of breathing. His legs went like pistons. "Hurry up, Binda," his comrades would say, as they saw him from a distance climbing up towards their camp. They tried to read in his face whether the news and orders he was bringing were good or bad. But Binda's face was shut like a fist, a narrow mountaineer's face with hairy lips on a short bony body, more like a boy's than a youth's, with muscles like stones. His was a tough and solitary job, being woken at all hours, sent out even to Serb's camp or Pele's, having to march in the dark valleys at night, accompanied only by a French Tommy gun, light as a wooden rifle, hanging on his shoulder. And when he reached a detachment, he had to move on to another, or return with the answer. He would wake up the cook and grope around in the coal pots, then leave again with a panful of chestnuts still sticking in his gullet. But it was the natural job for him, because he never got lost in the woods and knew all the paths, from having led goats about them or gone there for wood or hay since he was a child. And he never went lame or rubbed the skin off his feet, scrambling about the rocks, as so many partisans did, who'd come up from the towns or the navy. Glimpses caught as he went along a chestnut tree with a hollow trunk, blue lichen on a stone, the best space around a charcoal pit, linked themselves in his mind to his remotest memories. An escaped goat, a polecat driven from its lair, the raised skirt of a girl. And now the war in these parts was like a continuation of his normal life. Work, play, hunting, all turned into war. The smell of gunpowder at the Loreto Bridge, escapes down bushy slopes, minefields sown with death. The war twisted closely around and around in those valleys, like a dog trying to bite its tail. Partisans elbow to elbow, with Bersaglieri and fascist militia, each side alternating between mountain and valley, making wide turns around the crests so as not to run into one another and find themselves fired on, and always someone killed, either on hill or valley. Binda's village, San Faustino, was down among fields, 3 groups of houses on each side of the valley. His girl, Regina, hung out sheets from her window on days when there were roundups. Binda's village was a short haul on his way up and down, a sip of milk, a clean vest ready washed by his mother. Then off he had to hurry, in case the fascists suddenly arrived, for there hadn't been enough partisans killed at San Faustino. All winter it was a game of hide and seek, the Bersaglieri at Bierdo, the militia at Molini, the Germans at Briga, and in the middle of them the partisans squeezed into 2 corners of the valley, avoiding the roundups by moving from one to the other during the night. That very night a German column was marching on Briga, had perhaps already reached Carmo, and the militia were getting ready to reinforce Molina. The partisan detachments were sleeping in stalls around half-spent braziers. Binda marched along in the dark woods, with their salvation in his legs, for the order he carried was, "Evacuate the valleys at once, entire battalion and heavy machine guns to be on Mount Pellegrino by dawn." Binda felt anxiety fluttering in his lungs like bat's wings. He longed to grasp the slope 2 miles away, pull himself up to it, whisper the order like a breath of wind into the grass, and hear it flowing off through his moustache and nostrils, till it reached Vendetta, Serp, Garigula, then scoop himself out a hole in the chestnut leaves, and bury himself in it, he and Regina, first removing the cones that might prick Regina's legs. But the more leaves he scooped out, the more cones he found. It was impossible to make a place for Regina's legs there, her big soft legs with their smooth thin skin. The dry leaves and chestnut cones rustled, almost gurgled under Binda's feet. The squirrels with round glittering eyes ran to hide at the tops of trees. "Be quick, Binda," the commander for Gatta had said to him, giving him the message. Sleep rose from the heart of the night. There was a velvety feel on the inside of his eyelids. Binda would have liked to lose the path, plunge into a sea of dry leaves and swim in them until they submerged him. "Be quick, Binda." He was now walking on a narrow path along the upper slopes of the Tumina valley, which was still covered with ice. The widest valley in the area, it had high sides wide apart. The one opposite him was glimmering in the dark. The one on which he was walking had bare slopes scattered, with an occasional bush from which, in daytime, groups of partridges rose fluttering. Binda felt he saw a distant light, down in lower Tumina, moving ahead of him. It zigzagged every now and again, as if going round a curve, vanished, and reappeared a little farther on, in an unexpected spot. Who on earth could it be at that hour? Sometimes it seemed to Binda that the light was much farther away, on the other side of the valley, sometimes that it had stopped, and sometimes that it was behind him. Who could be carrying so many different lights along all the paths of Lower Tumina? Perhaps in front of him too, in Higher Tumina, winking on and off like that. The Germans. Following on Binda's tracks was an animal roused from deep back in his childhood. It was coming after him, would soon catch up with him. The animal of fear. Those lights were the Germans searching Tumina, bush by bush, in battalions. Impossible, Binda knew, although it would be almost pleasant to believe it, to abandon himself to the blandishments of that animal from childhood, which was following him so closely. Time was drumming, gulping in Binda's throat. Perhaps it was too late now to arrive before the Germans and save his comrades. Binda could see Vendetta's hut at Castagana burned out, the bleeding bodies of his comrades, the heads of some of them hanging by their long hair on branches of larch trees. "Be quick, Binda." He was amazed at where he was, for he seemed to have gone such a little way in such a long time. Perhaps he had slowed down or even stopped without realizing it. He did not change his pace, however. He knew well that it was always regular and sure, that he mustn't trust the animal that came to visit him on these night missions, wetting his temples with its invisible fingers, slimy with saliva. Binda was a healthy lad, with good nerves, cool in every eventuality, and he held on to all his power to act, even though he was carrying that animal around. He was carrying that animal around with him, like a monkey tethered to his neck. The surface of the Colabraca meadow looked soft in the moonlight. Mines, thought Binda. There were no mines up there. Binda knew. They were a long way off, on the other side of the mountain. But now Binda began thinking that the mines might have moved underground from one part of the mountain to the other, following his steps like enormous underground spiders. The earth above mines produces strange funguses, disastrous to knock over. Everything would go up in a second, but each second would become as long as a century, and the world would have stopped as if by magic. Now Binda was going down through the wood. Drowsiness and darkness drew gloomy masks on the tree trunks and bushes. There were Germans all around. They must have seen him pass the Collar meadow in the moonlight. They were following him, waiting for him at the entrance to the wood. An owl hooted nearby. It was a whistle, a signal for the Germans to close in around him. There, another whistle. He was surrounded. An animal moved behind a bush of heather. Perhaps it was a hare, perhaps a fox, perhaps a German lying in the thickets, keeping him covered. There were Germans in every thicket. A German perched at the top of every tree with the squirrels. The stones were palliating with helmets. Rifles were sprouting among the branches. The roots of the trees ended in human feet. Binda was walking between a double row of hidden Germans, who were looking at him with glistening eyes from among the leaves. The farther he walked, the deeper he penetrated their ranks. At the third, the fourth, the sixth hoot of the owl, all the Germans would jump to their feet around him, their guns pointed, their chests crossed by Sten gun straps. One named Gund, in the middle of them, with a terrible white smile under his helmet, would stretch out his huge hands to seize him. Binda was afraid to turn around, in case he saw Gund looming above his shoulders, Sten gun at the ready, hands open in the air. Or perhaps Gund would appear on the path ahead, pointing a finger at him, or come up and begin walking silently along beside him. Suddenly he thought he must have missed the way, yet he recognized the path, the stones, the trees, the smell of musk. But they were stones, trees, musk from another place, far away, from 1,000 different faraway places. After these stone steps there should be a short drop, not a bramble bush. After that slope a bush of broom, not of holly. The side of the path should be dry, not full of water and frogs. The frogs were in another valley near the Germans. At the turn of the path there was a German ambush waiting, and he'd suddenly fall into their hands, find himself facing the big German named Gund, who is deep down in all of us, and who opens his enormous hands above us all, yet never succeeds in catching us. To drive away Gund he must think of Regina, scoop a niche for Regina in the snow. But the snow is hard and frozen. Regina can't sit on it in her thin dress, nor can she sit under the pines. There are endless layers of pine needles. The earth beneath is all anthills, and Gund is already above, lowering his hands to their heads and throats. Lowering still! He gave a shriek. No, he must think of Regina, the girl who is in all of us, and for whom we all want to scoop a niche deep in the woods. The girl with big hips, dressed only in hair that falls down over her shoulders. But the pursuit between Binda and Gund is nearing its end. Vendetta's camp is now only 15-20 minutes away. Though Binda's thoughts run ahead, his feet go on placing themselves regularly, one in front of the other, so he won't lose breath. When he reaches his comrades, his fear will have vanished, cancelled even from the bottom of his memory, as something impossible. He must think of waking up Vendetta and Sciabola, the commissar, to explain Figato's order to them. Then he'll set off again to Serb's camp. But would he ever reach the hut? Wasn't he tied by a wire that dragged him farther away the nearer he got? And as he arrived, wouldn't he hear crunching from Germans sitting around the fire, eating up the remaining chestnuts? Binda imagined himself arriving at the hut to find it half burned out and deserted. He would go inside. Empty. But in a corner, huge, sitting on his haunches, with his helmet touching the ceiling, would be Gund, with his eyes round and glistening like the squirrel's, and his white-toothy smile between damp lips. Gund would make a sign to him. Sit down. And Binda would sit down. There, 100 yards off, a light. It was them. Which of them? He longed to turn back, to flee, as if all the danger were up there in the hut. But he walked on quickly, his face hard and closed like a fist. Now the fire suddenly seemed to be getting too near. Was it moving to meet him? Now to be getting farther off. Was it running away? But it was motionless, a campfire that had not yet gone out. As Binda knew. Who goes there? He did not quiver an eyelash. Binda, he said. I'm Savetta. Any news, Binda? Is Vendetta asleep? Now he was inside the hut, with sleeping comrades breathing all around him. Who could ever have thought of anything else? Germans down at Briga, fascists up at Molini. Evacuate. By dawn you're all to be up on the crest of Mount Pellegrino, with the heavies. Vendetta, scarcely awake, was fluttering his eyelids. God, he said. Then he got up, clapped his hands. Wake up, everyone. We've got to go out and fight. Binda was now sucking at a can of boiled chestnuts, spitting out the bits of skins sticking to them. The men divided up into shifts for carrying the ammunition and the tripod of the heavy. He set off. I'm going to Serps, he said. Be quick, Binda! Exclaimed his comrades.
Oh, bella ciao, bella ciao, bella ciao, ciao, ciao. Stamattina mi sono alzato e ho trovato l'invaso. Oh partigiano, portami via. Oh bella ciao, bella ciao, bella ciao, 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 partigiano.